Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for your time. This is something that having been a governor in Colorado, I'm not ignorant of. I'll start out with Ms. Tamarello. We signed into law a Colorado statute that requires reporting of security breaches of over 500 or more Colorado residents. Has to go to the Attorney General within 30 days. We also created the National Cybersecurity Center, which was and continues to be an effort to promote data security with both private and public companies. With the NCC, we launched cybersecurity for state leaders, which is a Google effort to educate, provide a training curriculum for state officials, including county commissioners and municipal folks. Obviously, timely reporting, as you guys have all said, pays a lot of different dividends. How should we think about a national reporting process? I think everyone's kind of talked about the need for it. What would you say it should look like in terms of how do we, as a small business person for many years myself, I want to start with your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think first and foremost, one standard is a huge advantage for small businesses and startups. And we've talked a lot about data minimization at this hearing. And I think one of the points that gets glossed over is that if you are having to follow a state-by-state patchwork, you are having to collect information about where your users are located to figure out if those state laws are implicated. And so creating a single standard not only incentivizes better data practices at the outset by not requiring state information, it also just makes it easier if a startup is the victim of a data breach and has to jump into action without having to figure out 50 state laws. And so I think, it almost, a 30-day reporting requirement seems reasonable. It's more just about having one requirement across the board.
Right. I wasn't going to suggest that Colorado be the model, but since you put it out there. Dr. Felton, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of these ransomware attacks that we've seen so much of. We had in May of 2020, JBS, just a large meat packer in Colorado, had a serious breach. We had a Colorado hospital that lost 5 years of electronic health records from 2012 to 2017. And it took 6 months to recover a lot of the critical health data. We've really pushed that businesses should provide security training for their employees, that they should have an incident response plan, that there should be a backup for their server data. So, I mean, obviously, as you all know, that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Organization or an enterprise is going to be breached. So what, in your opinion, Dr. Feldman, what targeted resources can Congress provide to support businesses' data security? In other words, what can we provide?
To support businesses specifically, I think there are important educational roles that government can play. The FTC has an office that is engaged in this education for consumers and small businesses to help them understand what's out there and how to make safe decisions, giving them simple checklists of best practices and so on. It becomes more difficult when you're talking about larger organizations that face more sophisticated threats. There, I think government can help to play a convening role so that information can flow between organizations about what are the best practices and how can they protect themselves.
Right. Well, I'd probably go further than that, but I appreciate that. And Mr. Lee, I was struck that in a large part what we're talking about here is security, the most basic type, and that the traditional way that we look at security in this country has been, we have the federal government does national security, and then most of us in our local communities have our local police department is where we really look at security. And yet right now, in terms of cybersecurity, it is largely relegated to the private sector, and for individual small companies, large companies, healthcare providers, it's catch as catch can. How do you see that balance between private companies providing cybersecurity protection and clearly what I think is becoming apparent, that the public need?
It's a great question, Senator, and I would also struck by something you just said about the question of it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's actually a matter of how many times,
Don't say that.
unfortunately.
Thank you.
The practical reality is the private sector and the government for their agencies are in the only position to be able to provide security and to prevent the kinds of incidents we're seeing that impact people, so create victims. So we have to have a partnership between all of the parties, beginning with government setting a standard, an enforceable standard, that then the private sector can go and implement. And they have the clear rules of the road, they know the consequences if they breach them, and they have the tools necessary to be able to implement them. If we have that system, we will reduce the number of cyber incidents, we'll reduce the number of data breaches, and we therefore will reduce the number of identity crime victims.
I think that's something we can all work toward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that questioning. I'm going to ask Senator Moran's indulgence from the hearing the other day we had. There's some confusion. I'm going to talk to Senator Wicker, and we've had Commerce Committee rules pre-COVID and then COVID adoption, and now we're still in a kind of a hybrid thing where some people are logging in, remotely. So I think we have to figure out how to get back to what rules that we're going to operate under, particularly.
Exactly, and some